everyone. Thanks for joining. Yeah, it's been back in vogue last few days with DeepSpeak, how model building and inference models are becoming commoditized, and the focus is going to come back on data aspects, the actual the oil for the models in terms of how best to protect it, what are the risks involved in deploying and developing enterprise agents, and all aspects related to that on a macro basis. Where we stand right now, AI or not, data security has been a pressing issue where breaches are still occurring. Size of the breaches keeps going up. And the focus really is for us in terms of talking about the risks. Number one on the agenda, we want this to be an educational output for you guys. Some actionable insights when you're thinking about AI journey in your organization or just thinking on the issue itself. What does it take to build one, and a chatbot, an agent, and what are the risks associated with that? And then obviously we're going to get into some use cases, and what better way to learn about some of these things than building one chatbot yourself. So we're at a high level, we'll go through some steps. What does it take in achieving that? And then talk about the risks that would introduce when you build that model or their chatbot. And then lastly, we're going to unveil is a strong word, but we've been building something around allowing organizations, enterprises to train and deploy third-party LLMs securely within for the internal use cases as well as their customers and external use cases. So it's action-packed. We'll kind of jump in. I wanted to hand over to Ed to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Yasir. Appreciate it. And really pleasure to be here. So my name is Ed Bellis. I was the co-founder and CTO of a company called Kenna Security in the risk-based vulnerability management space. Spent about 10 years doing that. We were acquired by Cisco back in 2021. And now are part of the Cisco vulnerability management team over there. I am now outside of Cisco at this moment and doing a lot of different things, including working with my friends over here at Polymer, working closely with Yasir. And it's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having. Ed has been our board member since 2020, basically since the company got founded. So he's been in the journey from the early days. I'm the founder, CEO of Polymer. We are what I think right now people call us a DSPM, Data Security Posture Management. We just think of ourselves as a data security platform that's securing your application stack and as well as AI workflows. And in terms of kind of where we want to set the stage is essentially around the macro. When you think about data security, it's not other aspects of cyber which are around vulnerability management, will be around parsing through lots of data. It's a very data intensive, ML and AI intensive heavy use case. On the other side, phishing attacks, that's a social engineering aspect of things where there are obviously some technical kind of challenges and risks that come in, as well as like how people can get fooled. When you think about data, though, it's an amalgamation of lots of different verticals coming together. There's like sociological, there's technical, and then there's obviously kind of like what's going on in the day, for example, both the geopolitical or macro. And then from a maturity angle, it's a lot of big play around governance and compliance also. So in terms of when we look at the stuff we've been talking about at Polymer over the years has been around data security is not just I identify an issue, there was a violation of a data leakage that happened, and I'm done. It's going to happen again. It's unless you train your folks, SOC teams are not necessarily best armed to understand what risks they've identified in many cases because they don't know the context of the information. And when we think about AI, these multidisciplinary topics are becoming a lot more prevalent. And it requires somewhat cross-dimensional thinking around both the technical and then also the non-technical human issues in there. So when we kind of move to the kind of next slide, Ed, how would you kind of define AI security in general? Like, I think there's a lot of buzz around this topic, but there's no clear definition. What would your definition be?
I don't know that I would necessarily apply a single definition, but really the way I think about AI security is a couple of twofold. There's kind of almost the traditional hardcore security aspect of things, like, how do I prevent things like prompt injection and different sort of technical matters around that. And then there's more of kind of probably the bigger issue, which is I think around privacy, confidentiality, hallucinations, things like that are more suited for the actual data itself, the models, the data that you're using to train those models, but then also the output of those models can you rely on the data that's coming out? Can you not only trust that it's actionable or correct, but also is it leaking out any sort of sensitive information, that sort of thing. So I almost think of it as like there's the security aspect of it, and then the data or privacy aspect of it are two different things, and addressed in almost two different ways normally.
Yeah, and in terms of like then coming up with a sustainable approach within organization, these things become so high bandwidth. There's so much information that gets surfaced, even in the best detection engines out there, that how do you even come up with a strategy in terms of handling, identifying, and remediating these? So going on to the next slide, Allison. So we started Polymer in 2020, launched in 2021. And what Polymer is doing over the years has been around application data, and understanding what's inside those environments, observability, how best to kind of engage with the business users in reducing the risk in these environments of data leakage. Obviously, remediation is a big aspect of it from a DLP perspective. If there is a violation, how best to remediate those things, how best to handle it, could be expiring, removing. And then data security in the age of AI is an interesting kind of topic that builds upon that, is taking into account all those three things above in looking at what is going inside the model and how the model is being used by the user in the ground in real time.
Hey, Yasir. So I hear a lot about DSPM these days. You mentioned it earlier. Obviously, DLP has also been around for a really long time. In fact, prior to my days at Kenna Security, I was the CISO over at Orbitz, and we had our own traditional DLP software that we were using. Back then it was on premise and not really built for the cloud. But I'm curious, from a Polymer perspective, how do you see the differences between the two?
I mean, we always thought we were building a DLP version 2, except the market never quite appreciated what DLP brings to the table. Historically, DLP, I guess, in most CISOs' minds, is when data is already leaving, when the event has already happened, is when the engine is capturing that event. As technologies have evolved, NLP becoming cheaper, ML becoming much more accessible, obviously AWS services and GCP services out there that allow a lot of people to kind of build on those things also. You can provide now a value chain as a security product to the enterprise. So even without things leaving, observability will give you a sense of what information is in your databases, your Slack environments, your file storage systems. So even if, like, just to get a sense of what your environment or your risk profile looks like from an enterprise risk perspective. So I feel that DSPM, at least the way Gartner will define it, or some of the buyers of our product or competitors' products will look at it, is providing value up the chain even before it's actually leaving the firewall, leaving your endpoint, or being leaked by the user. But being able to then, some DSPM have the ability to prohibit or stop those things from happening in the tracks. We do that. Some folks don't, but it kind of all bubbles into this DSPM category in general.
Got it. Got it. Super helpful. Thank you.
So in terms of the, when we look at AI use cases in general, why this topic is so relevant, and this is slide 11, Allison. Actually, the one before, probably. I would say the 85% of the one before that. Yeah. Let's start with 7. Sorry. So yeah, so we work with a bunch of customers around this topic. So kind of talking from some sense of seeing this problem firsthand. Next slide. In terms of when we think about the data security in the age of AI, what are the different dimensions within that? And let's go to the next slide, Alison. When you look at the AI pillars, what does AI mean in general? Like there are 3 components to it. One are the models, obviously, the OpenAI, the DeepSeeks, Anthropic, so and so forth, Gemini, obviously. And then there's the compute. How do we process? How do we train these models? And also being able to deploy vector databases that can be used for these models to be run in the ground in real time. And then the third piece is the data component. For today's purposes, we're not going to talk about the models and compute per se, or we'll touch upon them. But the focus here is going to be purely data and maybe some sense around the OWASP top 10, what that risk for AI would look like. How we are enabling, and I have this, we're getting into the meat of the topic, but wanted to set the stage before I go through some of the use cases and do a shameless plug here for Polymer here, which is real quick. In terms of how we're enabling AI for companies is a plug-and-play the security fabric that connects into your application stack, which was our DSPM product, which is our DSPM product currently. And then allowing an access layer that sits above that to interact with third-party LLMs. This can allow, have control, give control to organizations, what data can go inside the model, but also have a dynamic access policy at the prompt and have guardrails around what data can be accessed by what types of people.
That's interesting. So one of the things that I've seen quite a bit these days around AI, and obviously I'm a little biased that I live in the security world, so all of the stuff that I tend to focus on around AI has something to do with, in my world, probably a little bit different than yours, Yasir, is using AI to secure versus securing AI. So what I mean by that is you'll use large language models to do things like assist in static analysis for secure code scanning. You could use it. You mentioned the anti-phishing use cases before, and being able to feed in all of the text that comes in with an email to kind of make a binary judgment call around phishing. I've seen assistance in the SOC with relating to things like XDR and EDR that will kind of assist in an investigative manner, things like that. I'm curious though, some of that data is largely fed by machines, right? And some of it is kind of fed by humans, and you'll see things like reinforcement learning and things like the SOC assistant as an example. But what do you see as kind of what are some of the biggest risks that enterprises have today when it comes to implementing AI? And maybe it has nothing to do with using AI for security, but could be using AI in more general computing sense or general purposes. What do you usually see at Polymer?
So I think in terms of I always hark back upon about a decade ago or decade plus ago when the cloud first came in. And at that point, I was consulting with like S&P, Morningstar, CIBC banking institutions in New York. And the basic premise was, how can we allow our data to leave our data centers into a third party? And is it going to be safe there? And there's a lot of that replay, deja vu happening in the AI side for enterprises at least, users of my data, owners of my data, how can it be accessed? What are the downstream implications of what the results the agent will provide? Do I have any legal ramifications for that? So a lot of it's touching upon data risks. Obviously, there is other technical know-how challenges. For a lot of these companies don't have the technical chops, like the less sophisticated enterprises, obviously, who are going down the route of engaging with the consulting firms to develop some of the AI tooling out there. But the main kind of hole which organizations are going back to is a story that's been playing out for the last 10 years is your data classification. What information do I own? Have I classified it properly? That we know of firms who have enabled Copilot, and within days of going live, Copilot was reading sensitive documents. The customer, the client in mind, went back to Microsoft saying, how is it reading some confidential information in here in my SharePoint? And the answer was, well, you should have labeled this or classified this document. And that's kind of where you don't even know what you have. Problem is just rearing its ugly head when people are in a rush to throw all this data into a model and see what happens. And obviously, I don't know what you're seeing from your side, but use cases which are emerging are a lot around cost saving, help desk, maybe some low-hanging fruit. The meaty use cases, I think, are still being cooked upon. They're not quite out there yet so far.
Yeah, how do you? So that's good. That's interesting to me. So, I guess as an organization, then how do I know that? Is there some sort of readiness check? Are there red flags that I need to think about when I'm gonna go and start an AI initiative? So whether I'm even ready to do this or not, are there certain checks, certain things that I need to do in advance prior to kind of kicking off a project that would enable AI in my enterprise?
Yeah, so we are working with some AI readiness a workbook which is kind of tying upon three main areas from our perspective at least. One is a use case. What information do you need for that? Like your have you even defined the use case properly? A chatbot thrown at a data collection of data is not a good like a definition of an AI use case. Has it been properly defined? Has the critical data elements been identified and what needs to go as a corpus for this model, for this agent? And then from a security perspective, am I ready in terms of my infrastructure, obviously? And then once it's hardened up in the wild, when it's live, do I have any audit or any kind of logging functionality, or at least knowing, even if I can't stop it, knowing how my data is being used downstream. We're going to get into a slide for that, but let's kind of talk about the risks first. Let's start with from the top of the game in terms of the OWASP top 10 risks, which is, I think is like slide 13, that talks about pretty well-defined standard. NIST has something similar. The Fed had a AI readiness one also at some point, but there are 10 risks broken down between inputs and outputs is the easiest way to look at it. Obviously, from the input side, there is prompt injections. We see stories coming out on a almost daily basis how a given system can be fooled into exfiltrating information or running a command, a shell command, for example. Obviously, sensitive information related supply chain risks. And then from the output part, is my data quality, like is my information wrong, or do I have any metrics to even understand if it's wrong or not? How do I even measure? Like right now, the measurement tools of once the model goes in production, I don't even know what good looks like other than someone not screaming at me. So those just basic kind of benchmarks is kind of what the AI readiness checklist looks like. And if you go to the slide 16, we can kind of go through some of these questions from an AI readiness questionnaire. Alison, these are around like, do I know where and how AI is being used in my organization? Like, can I verify my third-party models are secure, both from the perspective of the deployment, but also from connectivity. Am I hosting it locally or not? Like, is it a small size model? Obviously, you can easily locally host versus a large model where it'll be an HTTPS traffic going on in and out. Where is the data I'm putting in? Is it appearing somewhere else? Those are very common day one concerns, day zero concerns of LLM that are still there. But having some sort of a catalog of what information is going in and being able to monitor this on the output with some audits and guardrails. Is it performing? Is it leaking information beyond what I expected it to be? I don't know if you want to throw some other questions in there, but this is kind of like basis of, we have a spreadsheet for this, but this is kind of some of the high level questions that come up.
Yeah, no, this makes a lot of sense. Thanks. This is kind of what I was getting at. I'm curious, like, so like data classification comes to mind, right? As I start one of these projects, knowing what I am actually, what data I am using to train the model, because there, obviously at some point that data could leak out. It's interesting to me. I feel like there's a lot of challenges on the AI front that really, in my mind, don't have that traditional security issue. Like we talked a little bit about things like prompt injection. I feel like that's a known problem that feels a lot like, oh, it's where it's what SQL injection was to application security, prompt injection is essentially to AI. Whereas a lot of these other issues have really nothing to do with those old traditional technical problems. They're completely new challenges.
Yeah, and although I would say that obviously the good news doesn't make it to the news front page as quickly as the bad news, like prompt injection did X.
Yeah.
But when you look at LangChain, which is a kind of like a open source project to be able to get your AI LLM APIs ready to go plug and play, there is a lot of services that are being enabled where you can check for prompt injections, hallucinations, re-verify the quality, re-rank your results. And obviously, out of the box, we've been working with Vertex AI and Gemini, but a lot of that stuff is already baked in. So it's much better now than even what I would say even 2 months ago. So I would say the guardrails are slowly coming into place just by the model developers themselves, which is quite it's moving fast. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, so it sounds like the security of AI is at least moving a lot faster than it was for apps at 20 years ago.
Yeah, except the human risk still persists. But
Yeah.
what we do next is let's kind of go through some why we are harping upon application data stack. When we think about AI chatbots, in people's mind, it's like connecting to a database or a blob store or cloud storage or S3 buckets, and you get on with it. But this is just a list, some various surveys which we kind of like scan, not comprehensive, but just to give you a sense from a 2025 AI use cases, there is obviously, cybersecurity compliance monitoring, all the data coming in, how best to kind of be able to handle that. IT help desk, we talked about that. A lot of these use cases have a highway running through your application stack data. This is data that just sits within your SharePoint. This is data that's sitting within your HubSpot CRM or Salesforce or Zendesk, and not necessarily in a database. And that's what I want the viewers to kind of really take away from this webinar today is this data is not necessarily as protected as your database data, number one. And building hooks into these data environments along with your databases and blob stores and everything else, it requires a slightly different way of thinking than just a pure application, which is serving up results as a report, for example. And that's kind of where we'll dig in, where let's build a chatbot at a high level in terms of what are the steps it would take to build a chatbot. And we're going to talk about a customer success AI agent. It's a very simple chatbot. We're thinking of my customer tickets are sitting in Zendesk, and I want my customers to be able to go and play with the data, ask questions. Let's go to the next one. I basically decide I want to select a LLM off the shelf, let's say OpenAI or Gemini. I'll go to LangChain. There are services available that can plug these things in pretty quickly. Anthropic's the model layer that they're developing also allows you to do some of this stuff. And then kind of moving on, we're basically now thinking about, what is the data available? We need a training data in there. We extract the information set. Let's keep moving. And at that point, we're going to basically classify the information. And classification can also mean you running it and creating the context of this data set. Context could be when you think about tokens or think about embeddings, you can do it embeddings of at a word level, at a sentence level, at a paragraph level, or at a full context window level. And the classification of information basically is one sense to understand, is there sensitive data in there or not? And then secondly, it's also the input into running the context window to create your embeddings that go into your vector DB. At this point, we're going to create and store your embeddings in the vector DB. Essentially at that point, apply a prompt in the front end. It could be a chatbot that's sitting in your Slack. And you can use a prompt to embeddings kind of translator, converter, like all the models, like Vertex AI is the one we use, for example. It's pretty standard to be able to kind of have anyone ask in natural language, they'll convert into embeddings lookup, you go to the vector DB, get the embeddings result, and soup up the results. And basically, in the next slide, you'll see is like you have your output ready. Let's go to the next slide here. Ed, do you know how to make a chatbot now?
Hold on one second. I'm going to get some funding.
Or you can ask ChatGPT or Hey Dave or something to do this. Like it's the code for this. Within like 5 prompts you can create, and within an hour, I've been able to do an executable of this pretty quickly. So it has become quite easy. But let's.
Just so I'm clear, did you just suggest I use AI to create AI? That's very meta.
We're getting to that stage basically. It's still a human running the buttons though. We're still the operator for a bit. At some point we won't be needed also. So my agent will do that for you, like my virtual agent.
Oh, perfect.
Agent. There's a agent of mine which will be technical, agent of mine which will be more like, I don't know, some other types of persona of mine. But this is just to illustrate building these things are becoming a commodity. At an enterprise level, obviously, these things become slightly, you run into scalability challenges. You have to connect, you need to work through queues, get the data, training information, and then being able to run it in real time to see how the results are. But what did I just introduce into my environment by building this chatbot? At my compliance team have no visibility. There is some observability, but not really. Like maybe, okay, I need to put in logging now. So you get some visibility there at the end that all the interactions get logged. Security, I have no control. So I need to put a function in there to create a prompt injection control over there, which is not foolproof. So you need to use multiple of them. Security, data leakage, well, we didn't even talk about that. Yes, we're classifying information. Ways to handling that is at the embedding level, there's a concept of metadata where you can say it's got sensitive data or not. So there's ways of playing around with it. That's the approach we took. And then privacy obviously is oversharing. Am I oversharing my information to the model or at the prompt level? And so on and so forth. There's a laundry list that keeps adding. What this basically informed us when we were doing this last year was when you look at an average company, the size of the environments, number of files, number of documents, even for a small size organization runs into hundreds and thousands. And, they could be, there's some stat around like almost 1 million files, unauthorized access. And we believe that because in the Google Drive, we see public shares alive for, employee data sitting a decade or 5 years or something easily. So it's not uncommon. And then a lot of the information that's sitting, touching your customers, touching your internal teams, touching your product and development team have sensitive information in there. So how do we kind of create a framework that can essentially allow you to build that chatbot, first of all, quickly with a lot of cost saving, and then have a governance framework. And that's kind of where we set ourselves the challenge of saying, okay, what do we need to achieve in terms of for an enterprise to be able to, Alison, let's go to the next two slides. A secure RAG essentially is a concept that came around with that. And the Polymer secure RAG basically is a deployment model for enterprises to securely ship and AI agents, chatbots, if they're using third-party LLMs. If you're building your own models, that's one thing, but the idea is to basically, if you're using Gemini, if you're using Anthropic, OpenAI, can we have a better framework in terms of deploying those things? Next slide, Allison. Around the deployment of agents or chatbots for internal as well as external use cases for enterprises. And I don't know if you have time for a live demo. We'll try to get that swinging in the end, but let me kind of get to the next slide and we'll show a little bit of that in motion. Let's make that slightly bigger. So when you think about how we constructed that chatbot, the first step was your input information. Out of the box, when you're connecting into those things, if you have to decide and build a governance framework, what data is going to go in my model versus not, you basically will have to build a whole data governance product or DLP product like we did. So since we've already done the work, the approach we've taken is you can define through our platform when you're connecting into the environments and you're deploying a chatbot or an agent. Let's go back there. Let's just stay there. You're going to connect it to the different connections and decide what types of information my model can have access to. So I'm going to allow, in this case, all channels of Slack to be included. I want to exclude certain channels which are for management. I want to include all files except files that are tagged confidential by Polymer, for example. I want to include files that contain all customer data, but no PII. I want to maybe redact out of the PII information, but put in all the other information of these documents in the model. I can decide within Teams, within Salesforce, within Zendesk, email systems. And then that's your input that goes in the model for your embeddings and for your training. Ed, do you have any questions? Does that make sense?
It does, and I do have a question actually. So you talked a little bit in an earlier slide about one of the issues with that Zendesk agent you made was oversharing. Oversharing is interesting to me because you talked about when you're training your model, maybe I'll filter out PII, or I won't include this sensitive information, but I will include this information. What about where I'm building out an application, for lack of a better term, maybe it's a HR application, right? And my HR team might need access to some of the results that could be considered sensitive, but generally speaking, most of the employees in the organization don't need that access. Is there ways with SecureRAG where I could prevent or I could limit who gets to see that information that's coming out of it to only certain users?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually run into this problem all the time in regular kind of application stack in general. So underneath within the Polymer platform, you can connect into your identity providers like Okta, AD, and assign entity level permissioning or access to content based on which part of the organization, internal or external, domain, this person should have access to what types of data. And that allows you when you, I don't think we have this on this screen right now, but if you go to the next slide, on the architecture basis, the goal is that on the very right-hand side, the dynamic access policy, you underneath the engine, we have this mapping mechanism that can be deployed into your application stack. And that same group level permissioning for knowledge or corpus or content can be applied in real time at the prompt level. And the whole idea there is essentially a user comes in, asks the same question, who is Yasir really, for example, what information can I have on him? Something. If a HR person is asking, I would want to go into JustWorks, extract out the maybe the last 5 payments, the 1099 payments, whatever that might be on that user. But a salesperson who's trying to get a blob of Yasir Ali bio, he wants to stick into a presentation or something, might want to see a different result. The way the vector DB embeddings work is we have the embedding, we have the metadata around what types of information this embedding contain. So let's say you ask this question at the prompt. The prompt, in this case, Gemini will convert that text into embedding values. Those embedding values will be looked up in the vector DB and soup up the results. But depending on the user who's asking the question, Polymer will be filtering out the results that the particular group should not have access to. So it's not perfect yet, but that is kind of at least where we can create some hard no-go areas of sensitive data not leaking out at the prompt. Prompt level content inspection, which we do in Slack and Teams for real-time interactions for our customers, that's the same approach we've applied here. And the goal is that we want to encourage organizations to put in all the data in the model, actually, rather than limiting, to improve the efficacy of the model. And we, once our customers are using this right now, they've been giving us feedback. The goal is that they should not worry about what goes in the model, as long as it's locally hosted infrastructure-wise, it's fine. But at the runtime, the controls can be applied without degrading the performance.
That's interesting. Yeah, that rings true for me, even when thinking about it from some of the things I brought up earlier about using AI for security. A lot of hesitation goes around using things like, I don't want my developers to copy and paste their own code into something like ChatGPT, right? And have that out there somewhere in an LLM or in a model that I don't control. But if if I'm using something like this RAG implementation and I use SecureRAG, what you're saying is I could ultimately use that and allow developers to access certain chunks of code that come even with input or output side without having to worry about the entire organization as well.
Yeah, and right now we've enabled this for internal use cases. When you think about kind of external facing agents or chatbots or non-human to non-human interactions where AI is building other AI, we talked about earlier. You see a world where you can have certain types of domains, or you might want to access other groups' policies or be able to request policies from a different organization to be able to soup up the results for them if it's your partner, for example. There is, because of these level of automations where there is intelligence now in the middle, a lot of that is possible now where it's not like a dumb, answer the question and then you need to go solve for it. So there's a lot that could be added here. We're basically building this upon existing tech we have, and we are getting some interesting feedback around how do we overload the embedding values with the metadata and other aspects, and making that a full-blown schema that could then be leveraged for other use cases, not just from security, to be honest. I think that's kind of where we're really going deeper with Vertex AI. Gemini is the chatbot we are in live with our customers, and that the goal is to kind of just dig deeper with Vertex AI in terms of kind of solving some of those issues, and before we kind of allow other third-party LLMs. I think one of the questions that was asked by Dan is prompt injections to SQL injections. So it's a interesting question. Let me just read it out. How do you actually prevent prompt injection in a similar sense to parameterize queries? One of the major differences is that you can't fundamentally separate user from the system prompts, whereas with SQL, you can actually abstract the variables. Ed, you want to take a stab at it? I have an answer, but if you want to.
I'd love to hear your answer. I'm sure it's very different. I mean, I made the comparison earlier in the sense that they are both technical problems of kind of more traditional security around an LLM versus some of the more semantic, like privacy issues that you see regarding data leakage and things like that. That said, how you actually prevent prompt injection, I'm quite certain is very different than how you would prevent SQL injection. And as Dan referenced, right, you can use parameterized queries, abstract out the variables, and there's kind of a straightforward solution. And I would, while SQL injection isn't a solved problem, it's gone way down in terms of how often you actually see that in an application security sense. You mentioned a little bit about some of the out-of-box now capabilities of things like Gemini and others in the LLMs, but I'm curious as what are you seeing in terms of prompt injection prevention, and is there a common agreed upon technical way to prevent that?
So we're taking a little bit like a hard hammer approach of restricting in terms of what types of patterns or prompts we can take in, and exposing that as a settings for the customer to allow for SQL even in the prompt. Like, do I exclude SQL or just reject them all throughout? Can I do some rate limiting around, like, if someone is trying to like change just one value and keep putting a big bracketed text in there, is that something that could hint at something is trying to happen automatically, which is escalating, and I need to just stop it? Repeating a question more than 5 times, for example, there's various very basic, crude ways. We have put some stuff controls in there, but it's definitely a work in progress. The goal here for us is we might not have all the answers day one, but we would allow our customers to have the at least the controls or variables to inject their kind of solutions in line through the tool. For example, in our product right now, we're DSPM provider, but a couple of our customers asked, when you're scanning for code in GitHub, can you also include your packages and run them against the software supply chain risks API? So there is how we're designed and where we sit in the tech stack. I feel that we are well positioned to solve this problem, but TBD on that. So we will get back to you, Dan, on that. If there's any questions, feel free to please type them in the chat. Alison, I think we had 1 or 2 more slides left, and we can wrap it up. Yeah, so what are the goals of the SecureRAG? We want it to be as quick to deployment as possible. Even in the current product, it's literally a 20-minute phone call with the customer side, even large enterprises. Can we allow that same level of time to value, time to success, time to enablement as short? So the goal is within like a week, few days, can you enable a secured and privacy-aware chatbot within your enterprise? And in the SaaS environment, we're connecting into about 12 different applications right now, 12 to 15, depending on kind of how you look at it. For those key collaborative SaaS applications, I can say right now that end-to-end, within 10 days, not only would Polymer be scanning all the information, a large chunk of it, chunking it, and then enabling the prompt with Gemini, Vertex AI being the underlying engine for your environment. With active DLP controls, both on the input and the output, obviously, enterprise-grade audit and compliance. We're not model agnostic. We've been supported by the Google startup teams in helping design the SecureRAG, so thankful for that. And the goal is that we're going to be with Gemini exclusively for some time. The goal is to open it up to third-party models when the time comes. Anthropic, I think OpenAI is next, and Anthropic will be next after that. One of the issues with third-party LLMs is how do you create a infrastructure that's local within enterprise box? And Vertex AI and Gemini gave us a lot of capabilities to do a secure deployment of that within a VPC, private VPC at a customer level. When you think about yes, Llama you can download locally, but when you think about Anthropic and some of the other models out there, we run into the issues around HTTPS traffic. We cannot allow traffic to go out and in and out through any of the services we provide. So that's a limiting factor where some of these third-party apps, for example, we know a lot of search engines out there, enterprise search tools, some of the major ones, they are downloading documents locally from these environments and then passing it on to their own systems or however they do that. And that's one thing that limits in terms of the secure infrastructure piece that we're trying to like enable for our organization in the first place. Common data models, so that's a big one. We've already done the hard work around normalizing how your Slack data model looks like against your Google Drive, against your Zendesk and Salesforce. So that's something which out of the gates, we had already solved for, and that allows us to enable that in our data fabric where your chatbot or your agents are going to connect into multiple agents for that matter. And that can help speed up future developments on AI if you get on that journey now with us. And ultimately, obviously, the intent of all of this is cost savings. Anything you want to add here, Ed?
No, I think this covers it quite well. You said you're launching with Google Gemini, and I missed it. What are the next public models that you guys are targeting?
Gemini for the time being, for this quarter, probably OpenAI next quarter, Anthropic,
Okay.
Claude will be after that.
Makes sense. I asked for my own personal selfish interests.
Yeah. I think in conclusion, if there's any questions, we can feel free to throw them in, or we are available offline also. If you want to go to the next slide, Allison. You can schedule a demo. You can discuss kind of our DSPM product. And then we're here to actually just chat about AI challenges, AI, what we're seeing on the ground from an AI governance perspective. So use it as a resource. It necessarily doesn't have to be a hard sales call. We're here to chat, and do let us know if this webinar is helpful, and happy to kind of go through some of the related to Justin examples over a phone call, or help you build one if you are looking to do one yourself, a chatbot or an agent. Ed, any concluding remarks from you?
No, this is super helpful. I mean, to me, it's really interesting because there's a lot of different problems around implementing AI. There's tons of organizations that are now feels like kind of a bit of a AI gold rush going on right now. And as you mentioned earlier, some of those are going in a little bit with blinders on as to what it is that what data is going into the model, what data is already in the model, where is it leaking, all that sort of thing. So this is certainly a way I would say you could at least go in to those projects in a safer way. So super helpful for me just to kind of wrap my brains around what you guys have been building on the SecureRAG side. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
No, thank you. And we always think that cybersecurity products are a cost center. We would like to think that hopefully this could be a business enabler and go beyond just a way to as a cost budget for organizations. So that's one of the goals here. Allison, if there's nothing else, we can conclude. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And feel free to ping me through LinkedIn or email. We are available to answer questions. And if you want to discuss anything, let us know. Thank you. Thanks, Ed.